Hi everyone, Bluthany Skytano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it is time for a review of the new Matana Roberts project, Coin Coin, Chapter 4, Memphis. This is the latest LP from Chicago saxophonist, composer, spoken word artist, Matana Roberts, who has spent much of this decade ambitiously crafting an album series that she is now on the 4th installment of, Coin Coin. The whole thing functions like the musical equivalent to a multi-chapter book, exploring themes of one's past and how we remember it. So far it's been a pretty versatile series with the shocking shrieks and free jazz passages of Coin Coin Chapter 1 in 2011. In 2015, Roberts took the project into a surprisingly drony and experimental direction with Chapter 3, and even though I haven't loved every moment of Coin Coin so far, you really never know what you're going to get. Given the themes of Coin Coin so far, especially on this new album, one could make the assumption that Roberts' interpretation of memory or recollecting one's history, especially traumatic history, can be a pretty unpredictable or even disorienting experience. And as much as I do love Coin Coin Chapter 1, because that record did truly leave a pretty big impact on me with how bold some passages of it were, the more I listen to it, Chapter 4 might be my new favorite installment. Maybe the most gratifying chapter in the series so far. This record feels like I'm being aggressively pushed through this noisy, overwhelming series of scattered thoughts, interpreted through many things, spoken word pieces, spirituals, free jazz. Seems like the point is to make it hard for the listener to make heads or tails of anything, at least on the first leg of the record. That disorienting feeling, it kind of dissipates toward the end of the album as we get clearer views of the memories that Matana is pointing toward. It's like Roberts' main protagonist on the record, a young girl, is blocking these horrific memories out of her mind, but is slowly getting a firmer grasp of them toward the end of the whole thing. Now, the sound and the production on this record are very raw, upfront. Every instrument is clear as hell, a lot of punch, very dynamic, pretty much consistent with the sound quality that Constellation Records and Hotel to Tango have built their name on over the years. Even in the most cacophonous and abrasive and overwhelming free jazz passages on this record, there's still quite a bit of space between all the instrumentation. It's all very readable and intelligible. Each horn blurt and woodwind flutter and drum hit, you can really dive into the details of all of these pieces, despite how noisy they are. The production, the engineering does result in some pretty great sound palettes on this one, not gonna lie. The stumbling, drunken, screaming jazz horns on Fit to Be Tied are incredible. They sound like a violent alcoholic stepping out of a bar at 4 a.m. Some of the psychedelic swirls of vibraphone on the track Shoes of Gold are certainly pretty. Also, the eye-widening and chilling vocal harmonies on the track Her Mighty Waters Run, which is a very dark portrayal of a spiritual type song. Another moment on the record that's genuinely frightening. There's also the 10-minute Trail of the Smiling Sphinx, which works in multiple passages. One of the boldest and most telling phases is when we get what sounds like the scratchy, bowed double bass notes. I'm not sure what it would be if not that. And they are performed in such a way where they sound almost like a group of fat hogs just going insane on a bucket of slop, which is pretty odd, but it adds to the disturbing sound set on top of it of these reed and fiddle notes just screaming and going insane. Playing these very familiar and old country melodies, which in a bunch of different contexts would seem friendly, nice, or kind of upbeat, fun even, but on this record, instead, very dark, almost scary. In a way, I think it's a testament to how your brain can interpret really just about anything in a negative light when it's associated with a traumatic experience. Coin Coin Memphis kicks off with a bit of an intro with Jewels of the Sky, Inscription, which is a pretty dramatic drone that builds up into a massive mountain of bass, horns. Roberts then tensely rattles off what seems like an internal monologue from our main character here, talking about running and running, talking about her father, more memories of her father, being a child of the wind. A lot of lyrical repetition in this spoken word piece, which I think comes down to Roberts in the head of her character trying to recall these moments that she's referencing. Like she can't quite move beyond the handful of things that she's saying and connect it to anything else yet. So she's just kind of thinking of them over and over and over, folding them over in her mind to see if turning it over once more sort of raises up a new memory, a new fact, a new something, which at first is very odd, not really knowing or understanding where the album is going. But once you hear through the entire thing, listening to it over once more and kind of understanding where the whole thing is headed, it becomes quite ingenious. After this, we get some plucky acoustic notes, some jaw harp as well to really kind of bring that Southern flavor. I feel like I am just in the deep South in the dead of summer under the beating sun. I am just sweating my brains out. Now this calm gives way to the instrumental storm on Trail of the Smiling Sphinx that I mentioned earlier. We move through so many crushingly loud and disturbing moments on this track, it's really hard to keep up. The whole thing is just flattening my mind to the point where all the molecules spread out into the next galaxy. Spoken word on this track returns, more recollections of our protagonist's father, the family of the protagonist being given a hard time, I think, going to a white church or wanting to worship at a white church. The last fragment of this progression is this image of candy-colored skin being lit up by a bright hot light. And it's parts like this, especially going back and listening to the entire record, that give me a sinking feeling. I feel like I'm watching something happen in front of me that I am desperate to stop, but I'm powerless, I'm moving in slow motion, I'm not really there on that plane of reality. The very negative vibes coming off of this track are enhanced by harrowing horns, which all contrast very well with the spacious and dreamy Shoes of Gold, which references back to a story being told in a bit of spoken word earlier on the album. And while I like the sound, the aesthetic, the instrumental makeup of the track, compositionally, the song is mostly just very incoherent vibraphone, some guitar, some bass as well. I wish that there was a bit more chemistry in between all of the musicians on this track. For the most part, they seem almost disconnected in a way. Really, the whole thing just sounds like, I don't know, an experimental music piece coming from a 1950s soundstage owned by a major media studio. The next track, Wildfire Bear, isn't bad either, but I'm more excited by the middle of the track than I am by anything surrounding it. After that, we get Fit to Be Tied that I mentioned earlier. That just demented barroom jazz sound of the horns on this track is it's anxiety-inducing, it is disturbing, and so pivotal to the narrative and the progression of this album. Her Mighty Waters Run comes after this that I mentioned earlier. Incredible spiritual piece, great vocal break for the record too. Now with All Things Beautiful, which in my opinion is another incredible track here, we get more bits of the narrative. The smell of embers, people wearing hoods, being frightened, being told to run. Again, the story coming together, becoming clearer. On the following In the Fold, the narrative continues. There's lots of droning tones on this track, more jaw harp. Roberts singing the melody of This Little Light of Mine against this slightly unsettling backdrop. She depicts our protagonist here as being lost, having run away from this attack on her family. She is going to a new home, as she says. In the midst of where she is, she finds a plate of food, I guess in the middle of the wilderness, and every day she finds a new plate, but it's set further away from where I guess she's hiding out. She suspects this is a trap, but she continues on eating it anyway. Then we get some memories or updates on her parents post this event. Her father moving on, her mother in an asylum, essentially never seeing her again. After this, we have a very quick transition into Raise Yourself Up, which vocally features what I can only call like battle cries, pounding drums. It's a really aggressive buildup. It reminds me of so many amazing moments from some incredible Godspeed records over the years, honestly, but with a more jazzy, I guess, sound palette. The closing track is a pretty interesting mix of sounds, some pump organ, bold sax, industrial distortion just roaring away in the background like white noise, some rumbling bass too. It meets a somewhat abrupt end, but it's still a very bold finish for a very bold album that feels less like just sitting back and listening to some music and more like literally being transported into someone's shoes as they're having some of the most negative experiences of their entire life. Even though there were a few tracks that I thought could have been a bit better, I'm still walking away from this thing thinking, wow. I'm also left wondering what's next? What is after this for Roberts and for Coin Coin in general? Because certainly not every bit of the narrative and every memory presented here is sort of tied up and explained. I'm still leaving this album with a lot of questions. And conceptually, that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world, considering how dodgy and unpredictable the record's presentation of memory is. Overall, loving the concept behind this record, how well it is executed, loving the performances here. The production is incredible. Loving the writing and compositions, loving how compelling the spoken word passages on this thing are. This record is a feat, and Roberts should be very proud of what she's achieved here, because this thing has very quickly become one of my favorite jazz and experimental records of the decade. Sure, I wish it went on longer and I wish it told me more, but I guess that's just more reason to look out for the 5th installment of this series, and when it ever ends, it'll be interesting to go back and listen to all of them over again and see if the greater context of all of these records just kind of adds to the experience. I'm feeling a decent to strong 9 on this one. Transition, have you given this record a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Matana Roberts, Coin Coin, forever.